And I want everyone to welcome, as our keynote speaker, John Weingart.
Thank you, John. So I want to thank you all for caring about politics and government enough to have invested your time and your energy in the Eagleton Graduate Fellowship program. We hope that what you have experienced in and around this beautiful building will help you better contribute to creating a more caring, just, and humane civil society in your careers, in the communities in which you live, with your families, and in your interactions with old friends, newer friends, and strangers. Of course, whether you are completing school this month or have a few more years of academia ahead, you will be emerging into a real world that, COVID emergency or not, a real world that is scary. A world that is threatened by climate change and COVID, poverty and racism, guns and more guns, artificial intelligence, social media, and on and on. And one final category that belongs high on that list, political dysfunction, despair, and division. Political division was not invented by Donald Trump. He was not the first American president to have been elected with well under 50% of the vote, of the popular vote. When I came to work at Eagleton in February of 2000, Valentine's Day of 2000, Bill Clinton was in the White House, having gotten there with support from only 42% of the electorate. Later that year of 2000, though Al Gore would receive 543,000 more votes than George W. Bush, Bush would be declared the winner. While I think I remember handing out flyers for Adlai Stevenson when I was 8 years old, the first presidential race in which I was emotionally involved came in 1968 when I was in college. That was a tumultuous and tragic year. In November, when the votes were counted, it was close. The winning margin was less than 1%. But I still recall being astounded that Richard Nixon had somehow defeated Hubert Humphrey, even though no one I knew had voted for him. Overall, in the 12 presidential elections between that one in 1968 and Donald Trump's victory over Hillary Clinton in 2016, only 4 of the winning candidates for president received more than 51% of the vote. In fact, almost every 4 years during the last half century, at least 45% of the nation's voters have been disappointed, if not devastated, by the outcome. The nation has long been politically divided. Yet those earlier times, it seems to me, were different than the one in which we now live. Campaigns and elections generally were not marked by the same lasting venom, nor the same feeling by a winner and his supporters that the voters they hadn't attracted were the enemy, to be ignored if not vilified. They were not marked by the same conclusion by so many that there is no point in trying to search for common ground. And increasing numbers of political institutions at every level were not coming to be controlled by people whose views would have been considered extremely extreme and even un-American only a few years ago. If you are someone inclined toward pessimism and despair, these days there is plenty of ample material to pull you further in that direction. Yet, as some wise men and women have noted in other disturbing times, despair is a luxury we can't afford. For one thing, it offers neither a physically nor emotionally healthy way to live. And on a larger scale, it helps no one else find paths to more productive and, we can hope, more joy-filled lives. Instead, we need to seek signs of hope, sprigs of optimism, and deeper caring about others as we struggle to define and identify some successes in building steps to a better world. As Eagleton Fellows, you are forging 27 unique but overlapping paths in that direction, those directions. Not all of you are planning careers in government, but I know that most of you emerge from this program with a deeper respect for the people who do that work. In conversation and in your journals, most of you express surprise that people in government work so hard with such commitment to doing what they believe is the right thing, and that they do not deserve the disrespect and derision directed toward them, even if they work in the Division of Motor Vehicles. And while I, of course, think you are the best group of fellows we've had at Eagleton. I have seen, I have seen similar revelations about government service flow from many of the fellows and undergraduate associates who came before you. As you know, I'm about to retire after more than 20 years at Eagleton and more than 20 years in New Jersey state government. While I don't know what I'm going to do next, I have collected a few conclusions or reflections or maybe just pet peeves I want to share with you. I thought, by the way, that if I get a dog, Peeves would be a great name. I could say, this is my dog Peeves. This is my pet Peeves. So here are my thoughts. Some thoughts. First, your vote is important, not just for president, governor, and U.S. senator, but also for more local offices, including school boards. And in New Jersey this year, that's George Norcross, by the way. And if you go back, but to vote, it's important to vote for more local races, including school boards, and in New Jersey this year, the entire state legislature. But choosing which candidate to vote for should not be the same as the process for awarding a Nobel Prize, nor should it be the same as the process for deciding whether to grant a 5-star rating to a restaurant. We all have a constitutional right and moral obligation to decide which of the candidates on the ballot will best represent our views and interests, but not whether any candidate has lived a sufficiently exemplary life to, in some sense, deserve our vote, which we might withhold if we don't think a candidate has earned it or is pure enough in some sense. Second, when politicians change their mind, we should not dismiss them as flip-floppers, but rather encourage them to explain the evolution of their thinking. Maybe some of the rest of us will be able to see things in a new light. Third, when people look at government and say, the private sector would do it better, remind them of the constraints under which government agencies must operate, which many of you saw firsthand over the last year. For one thing, the tasks that we assign to the public sector often are ones in which the private sector has already tried and failed, or just didn't bother showing up. For another, government must operate with valuable but challenging requirements for openness and public involvement in decision-making that are unimaginable in the world of business. Fourth, it's good to number these points because then when the pages get out of order, I can get back to it. Fourth, recognize that the process for successfully advocating for new or expanded public programs tends to require a complex dance of underestimating the startup costs and the number of months or years required for completion, while overestimating the certainty or specificity of the desired results. While the emergence of this dynamic is in some sense understandable, as any desired public expense must compete with so many other needs and priorities, it also exacerbates public distrust, as initial claims of costs and benefits rarely are achieved. And fifth, some words of caution about a few words. The word they. Remind people who think that there may be an all-powerful they out there who could remedy society's ills if they wanted to, that such a force might be nice, but it doesn't exist. As the cartoonist Walt Kelly said long ago in his comic strip Pogo, we have met the enemy and it is us. Another word is demands. My advice or request is to use the word demands sparingly. It's a fighting word that implies there is no space for compromise. Promises. Politicians as a group are often derided for breaking their promises or making promises they can't keep. My observation is that they rarely actually use the word promise, but if they do, they should stop. What they mean and what they should say is, I'll do my best to accomplish this, or I'll make it my top priority. Life is far too certain and power generally too diffuse to reliably promise particular outcomes. And finally, the word politics. What do we mean when we say something is political? One way to define it is the process by which groups of people make decisions. If you're ordering a pizza with friends who have different preferences, as soon as you start thinking that this friend had a hard day so we ought to get the pepperoni she likes, but that another friend is trying to be a vegetarian so maybe mushrooms are the way to go, then you're into a mini political process. But the types of decisions we usually mean when calling them political take place in more public venues and with higher stakes. Politics in those settings includes identifying the set of tools you will need if you want to promote societal change at any level, and learning to use them effectively. I began this evening by saying that Donald Trump did not invent political division, but I must note that there is one way in which the nation does now seem to be united, and that is unfortunately that no one feels good about our current direction and future prospects. As you move ahead with the next chapters in your lives, you have your work cut out for you. But having had the privilege and pleasure of spending time with all of you this year, I know you are up to it. In the regulations governing graduation speakers, I understand it's required that a speaker offer some unsolicited advice. So in that vein, I hope you won't settle for work unless it is meaningful and something you enjoy at least most of the time. I hope that you will have the type of family you want, and I encourage you to try to collect old friends, friends who knew you when, maybe when you were in graduate school, for example, who can maybe help you understand and perhaps even laugh about how your life unfolds in the future. And finally, I think I've said finally a few times so far, but I've got a few more to go. And finally, don't be too surprised if life surprises you. For most of my years at Eagleton, I taught the closing course in the Eagleton Undergraduate Associates program. The students were all in their final semester of their senior year, and often seemed visibly anxious about their futures. Every week, if one of them announced before class that she had been accepted by a medical school, others would look close to tears, worrying, it appeared, if they had already messed up their future because of the application they didn't know to file, or because of the major they did or didn't pursue, or on and on. So one year, I took it on myself to try to calm their fears, and to use myself as an example of how life is not predictable nor fully in our control. I told the class that when I finished college, I had no real plans, and decided I would try to work in a political campaign for a candidate opposing the United States war in Vietnam. I wrote letters to several campaigns I had heard about in one way or another. One was for a man named Joe Duffy, who was running for the U.S. Senate from Connecticut. I had first heard of him from a hitchhiker I had picked up on my way back to college more than a year earlier. The hitchhiker had just been at a weekend conference and was very excited by this guy, a smart, soft-spoken minister who had told the group that although he had never run for office before, he was planning to campaign the following year and that he thought he could win. In the following months, I noticed Joe Duffy's name occasionally in the New York Times. I read that he was considering entering the race, and then later a small article that he had announced his candidacy. So in May of 1970, when I was seeking a campaign that might have me, Joe Duffy was one of the candidates to whom I wrote, and his was the first one to respond. So I drove to Hartford and had an interview with the campaign manager, who offered me a job for $75 a week, which I immediately accepted. I said to the campaign manager, I was willing to work for free, you know. And he said, in words that you should live by, you can't fire a volunteer. For the next 4 months, I worked full-time in that campaign, driving 13,000 miles, mostly in one Connecticut county, and seeing Joe Duffy win a surprising victory in the primary, only to be defeated in the general. Months later, I went to a campaign reunion. When one of the people I spoke with asked me what I was going to do next, I said, as I will say if you ask me this evening, I don't know. But I will not say what I said then. Maybe go to law school.
It's never too late.
He said, don't do that. Go to public policy school instead. I said, what's that? And he told me. He said that Princeton University had a pretty good one called the Woodrow Wilson School, and that he, in fact, was the school's director of admissions. So I applied. I got in, and I moved to New Jersey. 2 years later, after getting my master's in public affairs from the Woodrow Wilson School, which now has the odd name of the School of Public and International Affairs, or SPIA, I started looking for a job to work in state government in Albany or maybe in Trenton. I learned that a professor whose course I had almost taken had left the Woodrow Wilson School and was now working in the New Jersey Department of Environmental Protection. And he was looking to hire someone for a job I thought I might be able to do. I applied and eventually was hired. I stayed in New Jersey, I married my wife, we had a daughter, and we bought the house we still live in. After many years and several jobs, I left the DEP and found myself running the district office for Rush Holt, my wonderful congressional representative. But I was feeling ready to do something else. One evening I went to a concert and ran into two people who had also been in the Department of Environmental Protection when I was there. I told them I was starting to look for a new job. After conferring during the intermission, they came back to me after the show saying, "We found your next job. You might be perfect for an open position at the Eagleton Institute of Politics." Once again, I knew what to say. I said, "What's that?" And they told me. I applied for that job. I came to this building for 4 sets of interviews, and 23 years later, here I am. So I wrapped up this summary of my life story. I told the seniors in my class that I hoped the saga hadn't been too long or boring, as I hope for you too, but that the lesson I hoped it offered is that while it is important to plan for your future and try to position yourself to find what will be fulfilling to you, it's also worth remembering that serendipity or luck or coincidence can often play a significant, unexpected role in your journey. As I finished, I looked out at the class. I saw they were silently looking back at me until one of them said, "You picked up a hitchhiker?" So to the Eagleton Fellows class of 2013, I congratulate you. I wish you much happiness and success, but probably you shouldn't pick up hitchhikers. Thank you, thank you.
Please join me in thanking John for his years of service to the state and to Eagleton, and we'll miss you.